Have you ever been proud of saving a kid you didn't know? I was walking to my car when this 13-year-old girl ran up to me shaking and crying. Please, I need you to be my mom. CPS is coming to my house in 15 minutes. She grabbed my wrist. My mom's stuck at work and my dad's coming. He's not supposed to have contact, but he knows about the visit. If they find out I'm alone, they'll take me. She had finger-shaped bruises on her upper arm. Fresh ones. Please, just until my real mom gets home from the hospital. She's a nurse. Emergency surgery ran over. I'm Rachel. 5 minutes later, I was in her living room holding her mother's driver's license. Melanie Wells. We looked similar enough if you didn't look too hard. The knock came exactly when Rachel said it would. CPS. Remember, Rachel whispered. You're Melanie Wells. Divorced 2 years. Dad is Brant. Restraining order since the divorce. I opened the door. Miss Frattini, come in. The social worker was younger than expected, maybe 30, carrying a thick file. She walked through the house checking things off. Fridge had food. Bedrooms were clean. No visible hazards. Professional, but tired. How have things been, Mrs. Wells? Same as always. Working doubles at regional. Keeping up with Rachel's school schedule. The lies came out smoother than they should have. Rachel, how's school? Good. Honor roll again. Rachel showed her a report card from the counter. All A's. Mrs. Frattini made notes. Your ex-husband called in another complaint. Says you're leaving Rachel alone overnight. Brant will say anything to get custody back, I said, surprising myself with the venom in my voice. The restraining order is still active? Until next year. That's when the pounding started. Melanie, open this door. I know you left her alone. Rachel went rigid. Mrs. Frattini looked at me. Is that Brant? He's not supposed to be here. I'll handle this. She opened the door before I could stop her. Brant pushed past her. 6'3", reeking of beer at 2 p.m. His eyes found me and narrowed. Who the hell are you? Watch your language, I said, stepping between him and Rachel. You're not Melanie. He turned to Missy Frattini. This isn't my ex-wife. Brant, what game are you? Melanie has a scar, right here. He pointed to his collarbone. From an accident. Where's your scar? Miss Frattini's eyes sharpened. Mrs. Wells, can I see your ID? My hand went to my purse and fumbled around for a minute. I don't have it on me, I said. It's in my other purse. Convenient. Brant smiled. Rachel, tell them the truth. This isn't your mother. Rachel was crying now, real tears. Dad, please, tell them or I will. Mrs. Wells, Mr. Frattini said slowly. I need to see identification. Now. She's my aunt, Rachel burst out. Mom's sister. She watches me sometimes when Mom works late. Melanie doesn't have a sister, Brant said. I was married to her for 11 years. Half-sister, I said quickly. Different fathers. We reconnected recently. Bullcrap. What's her maiden name then? I had no idea. Rachel's eyes were huge, terrified. Wells, I guessed. She kept it after the divorce. Wrong, it's Peterson. Brant was triumphant now. You're some stranger, she grabbed. Miss Frattini pulled out her phone. I'm calling the police. Wait, Rachel pleaded. She's trying to help. Be quiet, Rachel. Miss Frattini's voice was steel now. Ma'am, what's your real name? I tried to lie one more time. It's Melanie. The sound of sirens suddenly cut through everything. Not distant. Close. Multiple vehicles. Through the window, 2 police cars pulled up. Officers got out slowly. One was holding his hat. Are they here for her? Brant asked eagerly. The fraud? The officers came to the door. Young, solemn. We're looking for the family of Melanie Wells. That's my ex-wife, Brant said. But she's not here. This woman is pretending. Sir. The officer's voice was gentle but firm. There's been an accident. Highway 9. Mrs. Wells was. She didn't survive. The room went absolutely silent. Then Rachel suddenly screamed. Not crying. A raw animal sound. She collapsed against me, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. That's impossible, Brant said. This morning The accident was 90 minutes ago. Multiple vehicles. She was pronounced at the scene. Miss Frattini looked between all of us, her face pale. If Melanie Wells is deceased, then you... She turned to me, understanding dawning. You're not Melanie Wells. No. You're not her sister. No. Dad called you, Rachel sobbed. You called him when Mom didn't answer. You told him about the CPS visit. You told him she wasn't home. Brant stepped back. I didn't... You knew she'd be driving fast to get here. You knew. The officers were looking at everyone now, trying to piece together what they'd walked into. Miss Frattini still had her phone out. 911 half-dialed. Ma'am, one officer said to me. We need you to explain who you are and why you're in this house. She was helping me, Rachel said through her tears. Mom was late and I was scared and she helped me. You grabbed a stranger? Miss Frattini asked. From where? The parking lot. I was desperate. Brant laughed, ugly and sharp. So my daughter's been alone with some random woman, pretending she's her mother, lying to CPS, and Melanie's dead. He looked at the officers. Arrest her. Kidnapping. Fraud. Something. She didn't kidnap me. I begged her. Rachel, stop talking, Mr. Frattini said. She looked at me. Annalisa Mitchell? You're under arrest for the kidnapping of a minor. The officer behind me pulls my arms back and the metal cuffs snap around my wrists, cold and tight against my skin. Rachel is still crying those terrible gasping sobs, but I can barely hear her over the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. One officer starts reading me my rights, and the words wash over me in a blur. Something about remaining silent and anything I say being used against me, and I'm nodding but not really understanding. Brant stands there with his arms crossed and this ugly, satisfied smile on his face like he just won something, and I want to look away, but I can't stop staring at that expression. Miss Frattini hasn't moved from her spot near the door, her face pale and shocked, one hand still holding her phone. The officer guides me toward the front door, and I try to turn back to look at Rachel, but another officer blocks my view. My legs feel weird and disconnected as we walk outside to the patrol car, the afternoon sun too bright after the dimness of the living room. They put their hand on top of my head as I duck into the back seat, the way you see on TV, and the door slams shut with this final solid sound that makes everything real. The car smells like cleaning chemicals and old fast food, and there's a metal grate between me and the front seats. We drive through the neighborhood and I see people on their porches watching us go by, probably wondering what happened, and I feel shame burn through me even though I know I was trying to help. At the police station, they walk me through a side entrance and down a hallway with those harsh white lights that make everything look flat and ugly. The booking area has this long counter and a camera setup, and I stand there while they take my photo from the front and both sides, the flash making me blink. My hands are shaking as they press my fingers onto the ink pad and then roll them across the paper for prints, one finger at a time, and I watch the black smudges appear like I'm watching it happen to someone else. There are forms everywhere, stacks of paper with tiny print that I'm supposed to read and sign, and I try to focus, but the words swim together. When they ask for my personal stuff, I hand over my phone and wallet and watch them seal everything in a clear plastic bag with my name written on it in marker. They give me a property receipt and I fold it carefully and put it in my pocket even though I don't know why it matters. The female officer tells me to remove my jewelry and I take off my watch and the small silver ring I wear on my right hand, and those go in the bag too. Without my phone, I feel completely cut off from everything, like I've been erased from the world. They lead me down another hallway, and I know we're heading to the cells and panic rises in my throat. Before we get there, I stop walking and manage to say that I want a lawyer, my voice coming out steadier than I expected even though I'm terrified. The officer nods and makes a note on his clipboard, and that tiny bit of control, that one decision I got to make, settles something inside me. At least I didn't completely lose myself in all this chaos. At least I remembered to do that one thing right. The holding cell is small and cold with concrete walls painted this awful green color and a metal bench bolted to the floor. The door clangs shut behind me and I sit down on the bench, the metal cold even through my jeans. I put my head in my hands and try to replay everything that happened, trying to understand how helping a scared kid led me to this cell. Rachel's scream when the officers told her about her mom keeps echoing in my head, mixing with the image of her bruised arm and those desperate eyes in the parking lot when she grabbed my wrist. Part of me is absolutely certain I did the right thing, that anyone would have helped a terrified child in that situation. But another part is drowning in fear about what happens now. My emotions swing wildly from one extreme to the other, back and forth every few minutes, and I can't settle on what I'm supposed to feel. Time moves weird in the cell, stretching and compressing, so I have no idea if it's been 20 minutes or 2 hours when I finally hear footsteps in the hallway. A man appears outside the bars, maybe 40 with gray starting in his hair, and this rumpled suit that looks like he's been wearing it for days. He introduces himself as Grant Contreras, a public defender, and his eyes have that tired look like he's seen everything the system can throw at people. I stand up and walk to the bars and start explaining everything in this rushed jumble of words about Rachel in the parking lot and the bruises and Melanie being late and the CPS visit and Brant showing up drunk. He listens without interrupting, just nodding occasionally and taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finally run out of words, he looks at me and says the charges are serious, but he's handled worse, and I feel the first real relief since those handcuffs clicked shut. He explains we'll have an arraignment in the morning and he'll argue for reasonable bail, and I should try to get some rest tonight. Rest seems impossible, but I nod anyway. The next morning, they bring me to the courthouse in handcuffs again, walking me through a back entrance to avoid cameras. The courtroom is smaller than I expected with wood paneling and fluorescent lights, and I stand next to Grant while the judge reads through papers. The judge is an older woman with reading glasses, and she sets bail at $5,000 with conditions including no contact with Rachel or anyone in the Wells family. Grant nods like this is what he expected, and tells me my parents can wire the bail money. Within an hour, my parents come through. I can see the strain on their faces through the video call, where they confirm the transfer. And by early afternoon, I'm walking out into sunshine that feels completely wrong given everything that's happened. Grant walks me to the front entrance and reminds me this is just the beginning. We have a lot of work ahead, but for now I can go home and sleep in my own bed. I nod and thank him and push through the courthouse doors into the bright afternoon. That's when I see Brant waiting near the bottom of the steps with his phone held up, recording me. He starts yelling about kidnappers and liars and how I should be locked up forever, his voice loud and aggressive. I keep my eyes down and try to walk past him toward the parking lot where my parents said they'd wait. Miss Frattini is standing near her car watching the whole thing, her face carefully blank, but she doesn't approach or say anything. I make it to my parents' car without responding to any of Brant's taunts, but my hands are shaking again as I buckle my seatbelt. My mom reaches back and squeezes my shoulder and my dad just starts driving, Nobody saying anything because what is there to say? That evening after my parents leave and I'm alone in my apartment, Grant calls my cell. He explains the actual charges are false personation and obstruction of justice, not kidnapping like Brant kept threatening. These are still serious misdemeanors that could mean jail time, he says. But the kidnapping charge never materialized because Rachel came to me willingly and asked for help. I feel this weird mix of anxious relief and shame, grateful it's not worse but horrified that my attempt to help a scared kid created this legal nightmare. Grant tells me not to talk to anyone about the case, especially not on social media, and to document everything I remember but keep it private. After we hang up, I sit on my couch feeling numb and lost. I turn on the TV and flip through channels until I hit the local news, and there it is, the story about the fatal accident on Highway 9. They show aerial footage of the pileup, multiple cars crushed and emergency vehicles everywhere, and the reporter says Melanie Wells was pronounced dead at the scene. The reality of her death hits me different now. Not just an abstract tragedy, but a real person. A nurse who was desperately trying to get home to her daughter. I think about how she probably got that call about the CPS visit and panicked, probably drove too fast trying to make it in time, probably died thinking she'd failed Rachel. I start crying for the first time since this whole thing started, sitting alone on my couch grieving for someone I never met but tried to impersonate. The next morning, I wake up early after barely sleeping, my mind racing with everything that happened. I can't just sit around waiting for the legal process to unfold. I need to do something to help establish the context of what happened and why I agreed to help Rachel. I find a notebook and start writing down everything I remember from that parking lot encounter. Rachel's exact words when she ran up to me, the timeline of events, the bruises on her arm, the fear in her voice. Grant warned me to be careful what I say publicly, but creating this private record feels necessary for my own clarity, and maybe for my defense. I write for over an hour, filling page after page with details, trying to capture everything before my memory starts to fade or change. I close the notebook and grab my phone, pulling up Regional Hospital's main number with shaking fingers. The automated system makes me press through 4 different options before I finally reach someone in human resources. I explain I'm trying to verify when Melanie Wells's emergency surgery ran over that day, that it's important for understanding why she was late getting home. The woman on the other end goes quiet for a second, then tells me she can't confirm or deny any employee information without proper legal authorization. I try explaining the situation, how Melanie died in a car accident rushing home, how the timeline matters for a legal case, but she just repeats the same thing about privacy laws and HIPAA regulations. I thank her anyway, my voice tight and hang up feeling completely defeated. The frustration sits heavy in my chest because I know she's just doing her job, following the rules like she's supposed to, but it makes me realize how hard it's going to be to prove any of this. Every piece of evidence I need is locked behind privacy laws and legal procedures I don't understand. That afternoon, I drive back to Rachel's neighborhood without any real plan, parking a few houses down from her place and just sitting there trying to figure out what I'm even looking for. The street is quiet, a typical suburban block with neat lawns and cars and driveways. I'm about to give up and leave when a woman in her 60s comes out of the house directly across from Rachel's to check her mail. Something clicks in my memory, and I recognize her from that day. She was standing on her porch watching when the police cars arrived. I get out of my car and walk over carefully, not wanting to seem creepy or threatening. She eyes me with caution as I approach, her hand still on her mailbox. I introduce myself and explain I was the woman at the Wells house when the police came, and I'm trying to understand what happened that day. Her face shifts from wary to sympathetic, and she tells me her name is Gail Marsh, that she's lived on this street for 30 years. Then she says something that makes my heart jump. She saw Brant pounding on Rachel's door earlier that afternoon, hours before CPS even arrived. I ask her to tell me more, and she describes him stumbling up the walkway around noon, clearly drunk, yelling and banging on the door for several minutes before he left. She says she almost called the police, but he drove off before she could decide. I thank her about 5 times, my voice shaking with relief that someone else saw what was happening, that I'm not the only one who knows how bad things were. 2 days later, my phone rings with an unfamiliar number, and I almost don't answer, worried it's a reporter or someone from Brant's side. But I pick up on the 4th ring, and a woman introduces herself as Beverly Reeves from CPS. Her voice is professional, but not unkind, matter-of-fact in a way that actually calms me down a little. She explains they need to understand the full context of what happened that day, why I agreed to help Rachel, what I observed about the situation. She asks if I'll give a formal statement, and I say yes immediately, before she even finishes the question. We schedule a meeting for the next morning at the CPS office, and she tells me I can bring my lawyer if I want. I call Grant right after we hang up, and he agrees to come. Says it's smart to have him there to make sure I don't accidentally say something that could hurt my case. I spend the rest of the day nervous, but also relieved that someone official actually wants to hear my side of things. The CPS office is in a plain brick building downtown with security at the entrance and worn linoleum floors that squeak when you walk. Grant meets me in the lobby, and we go up to the 3rd floor together, where Beverly is waiting in a small conference room with another CPS worker, whose name I immediately forget. We all sit down at a table with fake wood finish, and Beverly opens a thick file, her pen ready. Grant sits beside me and nods slightly, giving me permission to speak. I tell them the whole truth about that parking lot encounter, how Rachel ran up to me shaking and crying, how she had fresh bruises on her arm, how terrified she was that her father would show up. I admit I knew it was wrong to lie about being Melanie, but I explain I believed Rachel was in immediate danger and that her mother would arrive any minute. The shame of saying it all out loud is intense, hearing my own voice describe the choices I made, but Beverly just nods and takes notes without any visible judgment on her face. The other worker asks a few questions about timing and what Rachel said exactly, and I answer as clearly as I can. When we're done after about 40 minutes, Beverly thanks me for coming in and says this helps them understand the context. I feel steadied by finally being heard, by having someone official document that I was trying to help a scared kid, not hurt anyone. That afternoon, I'm back in my apartment trying to distract myself with TV when my phone rings again. It's Gail Marsh, and she sounds determined, says she's been thinking about what we talked about, and she wants to give a formal statement about Brant's behavior. She tells me he's come by at least twice in recent weeks that she noticed, always agitated and loud, once so drunk he could barely walk straight. She mentions other incidents too, times when she heard yelling from the Wells house late at night, times when she saw Rachel looking scared on the front porch. I thank her over and over, my voice breaking a little because I can't believe this stranger is willing to get involved and tell the truth when she could just stay out of it. As soon as we hang up, I text Grant with shaking hands, telling him about Gail's offer. He responds within minutes saying this is exactly the kind of witness testimony we need, that he'll contact her tomorrow to arrange the statement. I feel the first real hope since this whole thing started. Like maybe the full picture will actually emerge and people will understand why I did what I did. That evening, Grant sends me a detailed email that I read 3 times to make sure I understand everything. He lists out all the evidence we need to preserve, doorbell camera footage from neighbors, police body cam recordings from that day, the 911 call audio, hospital records showing Melani's shift times. He explains he's already filed motions to prevent destruction of the body cam footage and is working on subpoenas for the rest. The email is thorough and organized in a way that makes me feel like someone competent is actually fighting for me, not just going through the motions. I write back thanking him and asking if there's anything I should be doing, and he responds quickly saying just stay out of trouble and let him handle the legal stuff. I feel grateful but also useless, like I should be doing more to help my own case, but understanding that sometimes the best thing is to step back and let the professionals work. Mizzy Frattini sits at her desk in the CPS office, her hands tired from a double shift of home visits that started at 7 this morning. She opens the Wells case file on her computer and stares at the cursor blinking in the notes section. The words come slowly as she types, documenting the home inspection in careful language. She notes she followed protocol for checking the residence, that the fridge had food and the bedrooms were clean and there were no visible hazards. Then she pauses and adds a line acknowledging she opened the door when Brant arrived, that she thought she could handle the situation but made an error in judgment. The words on the screen feel completely inadequate to capture the chaos of that afternoon. The sound of Rachel screaming when the officers announced her mother's death. The look on that stranger's face when the handcuffs went on. She types anyway because the system requires documentation, because her supervisor will read this and make decisions based on what she writes. When she finishes, she saves the file and closes her laptop, rubbing her eyes and wondering if she should have done something different, if there was a moment when better choices could have changed everything. The next day, Grant calls and asks me to come to his office, says he has something to show me. I drive over during my lunch break and he's waiting with his laptop open on his desk. He turns the screen toward me and plays footage from Gail's doorbell camera, the timestamp showing it's from that day, 2 hours before CPS arrived. The video clearly shows Brant stumbling up to Rachel's door, pounding on it with both fists and yelling something I can't quite make out. He's wearing the same clothes he had on later, and even in the grainy footage you can see he's unsteady on his feet. The timestamp proves he was already at the house and knew about the CPS visit before Ms. Frattini ever arrived. Grant plays it 3 times and I watch silently, feeling this weird mix of vindication and sickness. I'm glad the evidence exists. Glad there's proof of what Rachel was dealing with, but it also makes me sad knowing this is her normal life, that this chaos and fear is what she grew up with. Grant saves the file and adds it to his evidence folder, explaining this establishes Brant's pattern of harassment and his violation of the restraining order. That same afternoon, Grant files a motion to preserve all police body cam footage and 911 recordings from that day, and the judge grants it within hours. Grant calls to tell me and explains this is really important because the body cam will show exactly what happened when Brant forced his way into the house, how I was trying to protect Rachel, how out of control he was. I feel a small victory knowing this evidence won't disappear into some storage system and get erased, even though I'm also scared about what the footage might show of me pretending to be Melanie. Grant seems to read my mind and reminds me that context matters, that the judge will see the whole situation, not just the part where I lied. I hang up feeling cautiously hopeful, like maybe the truth will actually come out and people will understand this wasn't some criminal scheme. It was a split-second decision to help a terrified kid. A few days later, Grant forwards me an email from someone named Luis Painter, who works as a traffic investigator for the county. He's assigned to Melani's accident case and wants to interview me about the timeline that day. Grant advises me to cooperate fully since I'm not being investigated for the accident itself, just providing context about what was happening that led to Melanie rushing home. We schedule a meeting for tomorrow afternoon at a coffee shop near Grant's office. I spend that evening feeling anxious about reliving those hours in detail, about having to explain to an investigator how my actions might have contributed to the chain of events that ended with Melanie dead on Highway 9. I barely sleep that night, going over the timeline again and again in my head, trying to make sure I remember everything correctly so I can give Luis whatever information he needs to understand what happened. The next afternoon, I drive to the coffee shop near Grant's office, my stomach tight with nerves about reliving that day in detail. Luis is already there when I arrive, sitting at a corner table with a folder and laptop open in front of him. He stands when I approach, shaking my hand with a firm grip, and I notice the tired lines around his eyes that suggest he's seen too many accident scenes. We sit and he opens the folder, pulling out photos and diagrams that make my chest hurt. The semi jackknifed across 3 lanes on Highway 9, the pileup behind it, the crushed vehicles including one circled in red that must be Melani's car. Luis walks me through the sequence in a calm voice, explaining how the semi's brake line failed, causing it to lose control, how cars behind it tried to swerve and brake but couldn't avoid collision, how Melanie was 3 vehicles back and got caught in the chain reaction. He shows me the speed analysis indicating she was going maybe 10 over the limit. Fast, but not reckless. Just someone trying to get somewhere quickly. I stare at the photos feeling sick, knowing she was rushing home to Rachel, to that CPS visit, to a situation I helped create by agreeing to pretend to be her. Luis asks about the timeline that afternoon, and I walk him through everything I remember. Rachel approaching me in the parking lot around 1:30. Us arriving at her house by 1:40. The CPS visit starting right at 2. He makes notes and asks when I think Melanie would have left the hospital. I explain Rachel said the emergency surgery ran over, that her mom was supposed to be home by 2 but got delayed. Luis nods and says he needs phone records to establish when Brant called Melanie, and whether those calls contributed to her state of mind while driving. The weight of how many small moments led to that crash settles over me like a blanket. If the surgery had ended 5 minutes earlier, if Brant hadn't called, if I had told Rachel no in that parking lot, if the semi's brakes hadn't failed at that exact moment. Luis seems to read my thoughts and says accidents are usually a chain of circumstances, not one person's fault. But I can tell he's building a timeline to understand the full picture. I give him what details I can, and he thanks me, closing the folder and saying he'll be in touch if he needs anything else. That same afternoon, Grant calls and asks me to come to his office, saying he has something I need to hear. I drive over immediately, my hands shaking slightly on the wheel. Grant's office is small and cluttered with case files stacked everywhere, and he gestures for me to sit in the chair across from his desk. He turns his computer monitor so I can see it and clicks play on an audio file. Miss Frattini's voice comes through the speakers, tight and stressed, saying she needs police backup at an address I recognize as Rachel's house. The timestamp shows it's from that afternoon, and I can hear chaos in the background. Brant's voice yelling something about lies and fraud, Rachel crying, and then my own voice trying to calm everyone down saying, please, let's just wait for the police. Miss Frattini is asking Brant to leave and he's refusing, his words slurred and aggressive. The call lasts maybe 90 seconds before she hangs up, presumably when the officers arrived. Grant plays it 3 times and I listen feeling this weird mix of vindication and sadness. The evidence proves Brant was out of control, and I was trying to protect Rachel, but it also captures the moment everything fell apart. Grant saves the file and explains this establishes Brant's pattern of harassment and his violation of the restraining order. He points out the timing too, how the CPS visit was scheduled to end at 2:30, and Melanie should have arrived home right around then if not for the accident. The timing is brutally tight, everything happening in this narrow window where one delay or one change could have prevented the whole disaster. A few hours later, Gail shows up at Grant's office carrying a worn notebook. She sits down and Grant pulls out a legal form, explaining she's signing a sworn statement about what she witnessed that day. Gail nods and starts describing how Brant showed up at the Wells house around noon, before the CPS visit, pounding on the door and yelling for Melanie. She says she could smell alcohol on him even from her porch next door, that his movements were unsteady and his voice was loud and mean. Grant types everything she says into the statement form, asking clarifying questions about times and specific details. Gail also mentions that Melanie had talked to her a few days earlier, confiding that she was scared Brant would try something during the CPS visit. She says Melanie seemed really worried, like she knew her ex-husband was planning to cause trouble. Grant asks if Melanie said anything specific, and Gail thinks for a moment before saying, Melanie mentioned Brant had been calling her constantly, that he somehow found out about the visit, and was threatening to show up and prove she was an unfit mother. Grant finishes typing and prints the statement, having Gail read and sign it. She signs carefully, and Grant thanks her warmly, his voice genuine. I feel tears prick my eyes watching this stranger get involved to tell the truth when she could have just stayed out of it. Gail looks at me before she leaves and says she hopes everything works out, that she knows I was just trying to help Rachel. I thank her, my voice cracking slightly, and she squeezes my hand before walking out. Late that night, Ms. Frattini sits at her kitchen table with her laptop open, the cursor blinking in an email to her supervisor. The words come slowly as she types about the Wells case and her decision to open the door when Brant arrived. She writes that she thought she could de-escalate the situation, that she believed her training and authority would be enough to control the interaction. She admits she didn't realize he would force entry, that she misjudged how aggressive and intoxicated he was. The hardest part is typing that she should have called for police backup immediately, instead of trying to handle it herself. She knows this admission could cost her the job she's worked 5 years to build, that CPS takes protocol violations seriously, even when workers have good intentions. The email sits in her drafts folder for 20 minutes while she reads and rereads it, her finger hovering over the send button. Finally, she clicks it and watches the email disappear from her outbox, feeling a mix of relief and dread about what comes next. The next week, Grant calls to tell me an emergency family court hearing has been scheduled with Judge Leon Ashworth presiding. The hearing is to determine Rachel's temporary placement while CPS completes their investigation. Grant explains carefully that I won't be involved in this hearing since it's about Rachel's custody situation, not my criminal case. I feel frustrated hearing this, desperate to know what's happening with Rachel but having no legal right to be there or get information. Grant says he'll try to find out the outcome but can't make promises since it's a separate proceeding. The morning of the hearing, I spend anxiously checking my phone every few minutes, unable to focus on anything else. I keep imagining Rachel in that courtroom, scared and alone, having to face her father and relive everything that happened. My hands shake every time I pick up my phone, hoping for news but knowing I might not hear anything for hours or even days. At the courthouse, Beverly stands before Judge Ashworth presenting CPS's recommendation. She explains that given the restraining order violations, the evidence of intoxication, and the pattern of harassment documented in their investigation, they cannot recommend placement with Brant at this time. Instead, CPS is recommending Rachel stay in licensed foster care while they complete their full assessment. Beverly has brought detailed documentation showing every restraining order violation over the past year, the police calls from neighbors, Melanie's reports about Brant showing up drunk. She also presents Gail's sworn statement and the body cam footage from that day. Judge Ashworth reviews everything carefully, asking pointed questions about Rachel's safety and what services would be provided. Beverly explains they've identified an experienced foster family in the same school district, so Rachel can stay at her current school, maintaining some stability while everything else falls apart around her. The judge makes notes and asks about visitation, and Beverly recommends supervised visits only if Brant completes an alcohol assessment. Judge Ashworth listens to Brant's lawyer object but ultimately sides with CPS, ordering Rachel to remain in foster care with supervised visitation contingent on Brant's compliance with treatment requirements. That evening, I'm scrolling through Facebook when I see the post. Brant has written this long rant calling me a kidnapper and a fraud, demanding justice and asking everyone to share his story. He claims I manipulated his daughter and lied to CPS, that I should be in jail for what I did. Within an hour, his friends have shared it to every local community group, and the comments section fills with people who don't know the full story. They're calling for my arrest, saying I should be locked up, some even suggesting worse things. My name is tagged in the post, so notifications keep popping up as more people comment and share. I read through them feeling sick to my stomach, seeing how quickly public opinion can turn someone into a monster when they only hear one side. Someone finds my Instagram and starts commenting on old photos, calling me dangerous and crazy. I close both apps and sit on my couch shaking, understanding for the first time how social media can destroy someone's reputation in hours. My phone keeps buzzing with notifications, but I turn it off, unable to look at any more hate from strangers who think they know what happened. A week later, Grant calls saying the DA's office has reached out with a possible deal. If I plead guilty to false personation, they'll drop the obstruction charge and recommend probation instead of jail time. Grant explains this carefully, saying it's worth considering given how uncertain a trial outcome would be. He walks me through the pros and cons, never pressuring but making it clear this is probably the safer path. The decision is mine, though, he emphasizes. I spend the next 3 days barely sleeping, agonizing over whether accepting a plea deal means admitting I was wrong to help Rachel. Part of me wants to fight it, to make a jury understand why I did what I did, to prove I was trying to protect a scared kid. But Grant keeps reminding me that good intentions don't change the fact I broke the law, that a jury might not see it my way, that jail time is a real possibility if I lose at trial. I talk to my parents and they say they'll support whatever I decide, but they're scared of me going to trial and losing. I lie awake at night going over everything again and again, trying to figure out if there's a right answer when every choice feels wrong. 2 days later, I sit in the back row of Judge Ashworth's courtroom watching Rachel walk in with a woman I assume is her temporary foster parent. Rachel looks tiny in the big wooden room, her shoulders hunched forward like she's trying to make herself smaller. The judge is older, maybe 60, with gray hair and reading glasses that he keeps adjusting as he reviews papers. He calls the case number and everyone stands, and I watch Rachel's hands shake as she takes her seat at a table with someone I don't recognize. The judge reads through the CPS report slowly, his face serious but not unkind. He asks Rachel a few questions directly, and she answers quietly, her voice barely carrying across the room. After maybe 20 minutes of back and forth between lawyers, Judge Ashworth makes his ruling. Rachel stays in foster care for now. He appoints someone named Vivian Banks as her guardian ad litem and therapist. He sets up supervised visits with Brant, but only if Brant completes an alcohol test first. Rachel's face stays blank during all of this, like she's trying not to feel anything. I sit there in the public gallery gripping the bench in front of me, wanting so badly to do something but knowing I can't. When the hearing ends, Rachel walks out without looking around, and I don't try to follow her. 3 days after the hearing, Vivian Banks meets Rachel for their first therapy session in an office with big windows that let in afternoon sun. The room has comfortable chairs instead of a couch, art supplies stacked on shelves and plants in the corners that look healthy and cared for. Vivian watches Rachel come in and immediately notices how the girl holds herself. Rigid, alert, eyes scanning the room like she's checking for exits or threats. Rachel sits in the chair Vivian indicates but perches on the edge, not settling back. Vivian introduces herself calmly, explaining what a guardian ad litem does, and that this space is safe. Rachel nods but doesn't make eye contact, her gaze fixed somewhere near Vivian's shoulder. Vivian asks basic questions about school, and Rachel's answers come out clipped. 1 or 2 words maximum. How's your foster home? Fine. Are they treating you okay? Yes. Do you have friends at the school? Some. Vivian doesn't push or try to force more. She offers juice boxes from a small fridge and a plate of crackers. Rachel takes the juice after a moment but holds it without drinking. Vivian talks about the art supplies, mentions Rachel can draw or paint during sessions if she wants. No pressure to talk about hard things right away. They sit in silence for a few minutes, and Vivian watches Rachel's shoulders gradually drop maybe half an inch from where they started pressed up near her ears. It's small progress, but Vivian notes it as important. When the session ends after 40 minutes, Rachel leaves quickly but says thank you at the door, and Vivian counts that as a good first step. Luis Painter sits at his desk reviewing phone records that took 2 weeks and 3 subpoenas to obtain. The records show Brant's number calling Melanie's cell repeatedly that afternoon. First call at 1:15, right when her shift should have ended. Then again at 1:30. 2 more calls at 1:40 and 1:50. The last one at 2:05, just minutes before the accident. Melanie didn't answer any of them, but the calls kept coming, each one another attempt to reach her or harass her or both. Luis highlights the pattern in his report, noting that it establishes Brant's aggressive behavior that day. He writes carefully that this provides context for Melanie's mental state while driving. She was called repeatedly by her ex-husband, who had a restraining order, and who she knew was trying to catch her daughter alone. Luis stops short of saying the calls directly caused the accident because he can't prove that. The semi-jackknifed due to brake failure, and Melanie was caught in the resulting pileup. But the harassment pattern matters for the bigger picture of what was happening in that family. He adds the phone records to his accident file and marks them for submission to CPS and family court. Grant calls me on a Wednesday afternoon sounding satisfied. He got the subpoena for regional hospitals records, and they finally turned over Melanie's time card. The records show exactly what Rachel said. Melanie's shift was scheduled to end at 1, but an emergency surgery came in at 12:30. The surgery didn't finish until 2:15. Melanie clocked out at 2:18 and would have left the hospital by 2:20 at the latest. The CPS visit was scheduled to end at 2:30. If traffic had been normal, Melanie would have made it home right around the time the visit wrapped up, exactly like she planned. Grant reads me the timestamps, and I feel this painful mix of validation and grief. Melanie really was doing exactly what her daughter said. She wasn't neglecting Rachel or leaving her alone on purpose. She was stuck at work saving someone's life and then racing home to protect her daughter from a system that might take her away. The timeline proves Rachel told the truth about everything. I thank Grant and hang up, then sit on my couch staring at nothing for a while. Knowing Melanie was trying so hard to get home and didn't make it feels worse somehow than not knowing. On their 3rd session together, Rachel finally starts talking. Vivian doesn't push, just sits in her usual chair with her usual calm presence, and Rachel suddenly starts describing that day in the parking lot. The words come out fast and jumbled at first. How scared she was. How she knew if CPS found her alone, they'd take her away from her mom. How her dad had been calling and texting threats all week. How she saw me walking to my car and made a choice in like 5 seconds. She didn't think about consequences or laws or anything except needing someone to stand between her and her father. Rachel's hands twist together as she talks, her voice getting higher and tighter. She describes grabbing my wrist and begging me to pretend to be her mom. How desperate she felt. How she thought if she could just get through the visit, everything would be okay. Vivian listens without interrupting, her face showing she's really hearing what Rachel says. When Rachel finally stops talking and looks up, Vivian speaks quietly. She tells Rachel that what she did makes sense. That Rachel was trying to survive a scary situation the only way she could think of. That being scared doesn't make her bad or wrong. Rachel's eyes fill with tears, and Vivian hands her tissues and they sit together while Rachel cries for the first time since her mother died. Ms. Arfratini conducts a required interview with Brant as part of the ongoing CPS investigation. They sit across from each other in a gray conference room with a recording device on the table between them. Brant showed up 15 minutes late smelling like cologne that doesn't quite cover the beer underneath. Ms. Arfratini asks about his drinking and he waves it off. Says he has a beer now and then like anyone else. Nothing serious. She asks about the restraining order and he gets defensive immediately. Melanie was overreacting. She wanted to control everything. The bruises on Rachel's arm. Brant claims he grabbed her to stop her from running into traffic. Just being a concerned father. Ms. Fratini takes careful notes on every deflection and excuse. She watches how he blames Melanie for everything wrong in their marriage and their daughter's life. How he can't seem to take responsibility for any of his own choices. When she asks about showing up drunk at the house during the CPS visit, he gets angry, raises his voice, says he had every right to check on his daughter. Ms. Fratini keeps her face neutral and professional even though her stomach turns. She asks about Rachel's emotional state, and Brant calls his daughter manipulative. Says she lies to get attention. Ms. Fratini feels something crack in her professional detachment when he says that, but she keeps writing, documenting every word for the court record. When the interview ends, she has pages of notes showing a man who refuses to see his own problems. I drive to the store where I first met Rachel, parking in almost the same spot where she ran up to me crying. Inside, I ask for the manager and wait near customer service until he appears. I explain what I need. The parking lot surveillance footage from that day. I tell him it would show Rachel approaching me first, prove she came to me for help. The manager listens politely but shakes his head before I finish. Company policy. They can't release footage without a subpoena. Privacy concerns for other customers. Liability issues. I try to explain how important this is, but he's firm. His hands are tied by corporate rules. If my lawyer sends official paperwork, they'll comply, but not before. I leave frustrated, understanding he's protecting the store legally but still wanting to argue. In my car, I text Grant adding this to his growing list of evidence requests. The footage exists somewhere on a server, and I hope we can get it before the store deletes it in their normal rotation. Grant texts back quickly saying he'll file the subpoena tomorrow. I sit in the parking lot for a minute looking at the spot where Rachel grabbed my wrist and changed both our lives. The next day, Grant asks me to come to his office for a meeting. I sit across from his messy desk while he organizes his thoughts, shuffling papers into neat stacks. Then he looks at me directly and delivers truth I don't want to hear. Good intentions don't change the fact that I broke the law. I impersonated someone else. I lied to a government official. Those are crimes no matter why I did them. Grant explains this in his straightforward way. Not mean, but not soft either. The legal system has to treat false personation seriously because of the potential for harm. If everyone could pretend to be someone else whenever they thought they had a good reason, the whole system would fall apart. I listen, feeling the weight of consequences settle around me like something physical. He's not saying I was wrong to want to help Rachel. He's saying the law doesn't care about my motivations as much as my actions. I ask if that means I should take the plea deal. Grant says that's my choice, but going to trial is risky. A jury might understand why I did it, or they might just see someone who lied and broke the law. I leave his office understanding something hard. Doing the right thing and doing the legal thing aren't always the same. Sometimes you have to choose between them and then live with what comes after. That evening, Gail calls sounding excited. She was going through old papers and found notes she made from a non-emergency police call 2 weeks before the incident. She'd called to report Brant showing up drunk and aggressive at the Wells house around 10 at night. An officer came and filed a report even though no arrest was made. Gail gives me the case number and the officer's name. She says she's willing to testify about the pattern of Brant's behavior if it helps Rachel's case. I thank her multiple times, my voice shaky with gratitude. She didn't have to get involved. She could have stayed inside and ignored everything happening next door. But she chose to pay attention and document and now speak up. I text Grant immediately with the information, and he responds that this is another important piece showing Brant's pattern. Every bit of evidence matters in building the full picture of what Rachel was dealing with. After I hang up, I think about how many people could have helped Rachel before that day in the parking lot. How many neighbors saw things? How many teachers noticed bruises? How many people knew something was wrong but didn't want the hassle of getting involved? Gail is different, and I'm grateful people like her exist. Beverly Reeves sits at her computer late on a Friday drafting her official recommendation for the court. The cursor blinks on a blank document while she organizes her thoughts. She types carefully, documenting why returning Rachel to either parent isn't currently safe. Milani is deceased. That's the simple, terrible fact that eliminates one option. Brant has multiple restraining order violations documented by police. He has substance abuse concerns confirmed by his own behavior during the CPS visit and neighbor testimony. He shows lack of accountability and a pattern of blaming others for his choices. Beverly writes that she recommends continued foster placement with therapeutic services. Supervised visitation with Brant only after he completes alcohol assessment and treatment. Regular check-ins with Rachel's therapist. A safety plan monitored by CPS. She knows this recommendation will make Brant furious. He'll probably file motions and complaints. But her job isn't to make adults happy. It's to keep Rachel safe. Beverly reviews the document 3 times, checking every fact and citation. The weight of making decisions about a child's life sits heavy on her shoulders like it always does in these cases. She thinks about Miss Anfratini's mistake opening that door, and how one choice in a moment of stress changed everything. She thinks about the stranger who tried to help and ended up arrested. She thinks about Milani driving fast to get home and never making it. Then she stops thinking about all of that and focuses on Rachel, a 13-year-old girl who deserves safety and stability, and adults who protect her instead of putting her in danger. Beverly saves the document and marks it for submission to Judge Ashworth's clerk, first thing Monday morning. Louis sits at his desk with the dashcam footage playing on his monitor for the 4th time. The trucker who recorded it drove for a company out of Nebraska and pulled over immediately after the crash to check on people, handing his memory card to responding officers without being asked. The video shows Highway 9 from 3 cars back, traffic moving steadily at 60 miles per hour when the semi ahead suddenly lurches sideways. Its trailer swings out across 2 lanes, tires smoking as the driver fights to control it. Cars brake and swerve in every direction. A sedan clips the guardrail. A pickup truck spins completely around. Then Milani's Honda comes into frame, visible for maybe 3 seconds as she tries to brake and maneuver left. The pileup happens so fast Louise has to slow the footage down to track each collision. The semi's mechanical failure caused the jackknife. That much is clear from the tire marks and debris pattern. Milani wasn't speeding recklessly or driving erratically. She was just there when physics and bad luck converged. Luis rewinds to watch her car one more time, that brief glimpse of someone trying desperately to avoid the inevitable. He's investigated fatal accidents for 11 years, and this familiar grief settles in his chest, the kind that comes from knowing someone's last moments. He saves the footage to his case file and starts writing his report, documenting the timeline and mechanical evidence with careful precision. The report will show what happened, but not why it had to be Milani specifically. Not why this mother rushing home to her daughter ended up in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. Vivian stands in family court wearing her professional gray suit, her testimony folder organized on the witness stand beside her. Judge Ashworth looks down from the bench with tired eyes that suggest he's heard too many cases like this. The courtroom is smaller than people expect from TV, just functional furniture and beige walls. Brant sits at the defendant's table with his lawyer, his jaw tight. The foster care representative sits behind the CPS table taking notes. Vivian swears to tell the truth and settles into her chair, her posture calm and professional. The CPS attorney asks about her clinical assessment of Rachel. Vivian explains the child shows significant anxiety, hypervigilance around adult men, and trauma responses consistent with ongoing emotional abuse. She describes how Rachel flinches at loud noises and monitors doorways constantly during their sessions. When asked about her recommendations, Vivian speaks clearly about supervised contact, only until Brant completes substance abuse treatment and demonstrates sustained sobriety. She recommends anger management classes and parenting education, her tone neutral but firm. Judge Ashworth interrupts to ask how long Rachel has displayed these behaviors. Vivian explains they appear long-standing, not reactions to her mother's death alone. The judge asks about Rachel's relationship with her father before the divorce. Vivian notes Rachel describes feeling afraid of his temper and unsafe when he drinks. Brant's lawyer objects and the judge sustains it, but the point lands anyway. Vivian continues answering questions for 20 minutes, maintaining professional clarity while privately hoping this girl gets real protection. She knows judges don't always follow clinical recommendations, that family reunification often trumps safety concerns. When she steps down, she makes brief eye contact with the foster care rep who nods slightly, and Vivian walks out of the courtroom carrying her folder and a thin hope that someone listened. Grant calls me on a Tuesday afternoon to say the police body cam footage finally came through after weeks of bureaucratic delays. He watched it twice already, and wants me to come to his office to review it together before anyone else sees it. I drive over during my lunch break from the youth center, my stomach tight with nerves about watching that day play out on camera. His office smells like coffee and old files. He cues up the video on his laptop and we lean in to watch. The footage starts with officers approaching the house, their conversation quiet and professional as they discuss the death notification protocol. Then the door opens and everything changes. The camera catches Brant pushing past Ms. Sarfratini, his movements aggressive and unsteady. His words slur slightly as he yells about the fraud. The smell of alcohol must have been obvious even if the camera can't capture it. The footage shows me stepping between him and Rachel, my hands raised in a calming gesture. My voice shakes, but I'm clearly trying to de-escalate, asking him to step back and lower his voice. Rachel is visible behind me, pressed against the wall and crying. The officer's perspective captures how Brant looms over me, his size and anger filling the small entryway. Miss Frattini stands frozen near the door, her professional composure cracking. Grant pauses the video and points out how the timestamp proves the timeline matches my statement. He rewinds to show Brant's aggressive entry again, noting how clearly the camera picked up his slurred speech. When he plays the part where I pretend to be Milani, my stomach drops hearing my own lies spoken so confidently. Grant says this footage helps establish context about why I felt Rachel needed protection, but it also clearly shows me committing the crime I'm charged with. The body cam doesn't lie about either part. We watch the rest in silence, including the moment when the officers announce Melanie's death, and Rachel's scream cuts through everything. Grant closes the laptop and says the DA has this footage too now, and it will likely be shown at any hearing or trial. I leave his office feeling the weight of seeing myself on camera, how different it looks from the outside than it felt in that moment. Brant's lawyer files an emergency motion for custody 3 days later, the paperwork arriving at Grant's office via courier. Grant calls to tell me about it, his tone unsurprised but weary. The motion claims Rachel is being kept from her father unjustly, that CPS has overreached based on one incident, and that the restraining order was obtained through false allegations. It demands immediate return of custody pending full investigation. A hearing is scheduled for next Monday, barely giving anyone time to prepare proper responses. Grant explains this is standard procedure for parents fighting CPS involvement, that Brant's lawyer probably encouraged it as an aggressive opening move. He says the judge will almost certainly deny it given the documented restraining order violations and intoxication evidence, but we still need to be ready for anything. I feel fresh anxiety spike in my chest knowing Brant is fighting back hard, that he's not just accepting the supervised visits, but actively trying to get Rachel back into his custody. Grant reminds me I'm not a party to the family court proceedings, so I won't be in the courtroom, but the outcome affects my case because it establishes the context of danger Rachel faced. He says CPS will present all their evidence at the hearing, including the body cam footage and neighbor statements. I hang up feeling like the legal battles are multiplying faster than anyone can address them, that every resolution just creates 3 new conflicts. My part-time job schedule is already strained from court appearances, and now there's another hearing to worry about. I text my manager explaining I might need Monday off and get back a terse response about reliability. The pressure builds from every direction at once. That night, I sit alone in my apartment with my laptop open, trying to draft a letter to the court. The cursor blinks on a blank document while I organize my thoughts. Grant suggested I write something explaining my actions before sentencing, a chance to show genuine remorse while maintaining the truth about my intentions. The words come slowly. I type that I understand I broke the law by pretending to be Melanie Wells, that I accept full responsibility for my choices regardless of my motivations. I explain seeing Rachel's bruises and terror in that parking lot, how she begged me for help with such desperate urgency. I write about the split-second decision to try protecting her until her mother arrived, never imagining it would end in tragedy and criminal charges. Each sentence requires careful thought about how to convey both accountability and moral clarity. I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses or shifting blame, but I also won't pretend I regret trying to help a scared child. The balance feels impossible to strike. I delete whole paragraphs and rewrite them, struggling to express genuine remorse for breaking the law while standing by my intention to protect Rachel. After 2 hours, I have 3 paragraphs that feel honest but inadequate. I save the document and close my laptop, planning to show it to Grant tomorrow for his feedback. The act of writing it out helps clarify my own thinking, even if the words themselves feel clumsy. I know the court might not care about my intentions, that judges deal in actions and consequences, not feelings. But Grant said a sincere letter could matter at sentencing, that showing genuine reflection and accountability might influence the outcome. I lie in bed that night replaying the sentences in my head, wondering if honesty is enough when the law demands more than good intentions. Beverly stands at the front of the CPS conference room presenting a case study to her team of 12 social workers. The Wells incident file is projected on the screen behind her, names redacted but details clear. She walks through the timeline of the home visit, explaining how Mr. Frattini followed standard protocol for the inspection itself, but made a critical error when Brandt arrived. Beverly displays a slide showing the current policy about unauthorized individuals at home visits. She clicks to the next slide showing the new mandate, her voice firm as she explains workers should never open doors to non-authorized people during visits. Instead, they must call for police backup immediately and maintain control of the situation. The room is quiet as she explains how Ms. Frattini's decision, though made with good intentions to de-escalate, compromised everyone's safety. She shows the body cam footage of Brandt forcing entry, his aggressive movements and intoxication obvious. Several workers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Beverly pauses the video and asks what they would do differently. A younger worker raises her hand and says she would have called police the moment someone started pounding on the door. Another worker notes that opening the door gave Brandt an entry point he otherwise wouldn't have had. Beverly nods and explains that social workers are not law enforcement, that their job is to assess child safety, not manage domestic conflicts. She distributes new protocol sheets that outline specific steps for handling disruptions during home visits. The update requires workers to immediately contact their supervisor and police dispatch if anyone threatens or attempts to interfere with a visit. Beverly knows this won't prevent all dangerous situations, but it's a small institutional acknowledgement that the system failed that day. She thinks about Missy Frattini, who submitted a resignation letter last week rather than face a formal review. The cost of one mistake in a job where mistakes can be fatal. Beverly ends the presentation by reminding everyone that their primary obligation is child safety, not adult comfort or convenience. The team files out quietly, clutching their new protocol sheets. I lose 2 shifts at the restaurant where I work part-time because of court appearances the following week. My manager calls me into his office after the Monday shift I missed for Brandt's custody hearing. He sits behind his desk with my time card pulled up on his computer screen, pointing out the absences that have accumulated over the past month. He says he understands I'm dealing with legal issues, but the restaurant needs reliable staff, that other servers are covering my shifts and getting frustrated. He warns me that continued absences could cost me the position entirely, that he can't hold my job open indefinitely while I handle personal problems. I apologize and promise to minimize future absences, but even as I say it, I know more court dates are coming. Grant already scheduled a pretrial conference for next month, and there's the sentencing hearing after that. The financial pressure adds to everything else pressing down on me. I lie awake that night calculating how long I can afford rent if this drags on. My savings account has maybe 2 months of expenses left after paying Grant's retainer and covering lost wages. My parents offer to help, but they're already stretched thin from posting my bail money. Their retirement fund depleted by $5,000 they may never recover. I hate feeling like such a burden on them. Another problem they have to solve in their 60s. The youth center where I'm doing community service pays minimum wage for the hours I work beyond my required service, but it's not enough to cover everything. I consider asking for more hours, but my probation officer already warned me about overcommitting before my case resolves. The stress of it compounds with the legal anxiety and the guilt about Rachel and the grief about Melanie. I finally fall asleep around 3 in the morning, exhausted by worry that circles endlessly without resolution. Rachel sits at the kitchen table in her foster home with lined paper and a pencil, her handwriting careful and young as she drafts a letter to Judge Ashworth. The foster mother offered to help, but Rachel said she wanted to write it herself. She starts by introducing herself and explaining she's the girl from the case involving Annalisa Mitchell. She writes that she wants the court to be lenient with me because I was only trying to help her when she felt scared and alone. Her sentences are simple and direct. describing how terrified she felt in that parking lot, knowing her father might arrive before her mother. She explains that I stayed calm and kind even when everything fell apart, that I tried to protect her from someone who hurt her. Rachel crosses out a sentence and rewrites it more clearly. She adds that she knows I broke the law, but she doesn't think I should go to jail for helping her. The letter fills 2 pages in her neat cursive. She signs her name at the bottom and draws a small flower in the corner, something her mother used to do on notes she left for her. Rachel brings the letter to her next therapy session with Vivian and asks if it can be sent to the judge. Vivian reads it carefully, noting how the child's perspective comes through in every sentence. She explains that letters like this are part of victim impact materials, that the court considers how cases affect the people involved. Vivian decides to submit it as part of Rachel's file, knowing it shows the child's genuine feelings about what happened. She makes a copy for the record and seals the original in an envelope addressed to Judge Ashworth's chambers. Rachel watches her do it and asks if the judge will really read it. Vivian promises that he will, that judges take victim statements seriously even when they come from kids. Rachel nods and seems satisfied that her voice will be heard somehow in all these adult proceedings that decide her life. Luis completes his accident investigation report on a Friday afternoon, his desk covered with photos and timeline documents. He types the final section correlating when the CPS visit was scheduled, when Brant made his harassment calls to Melani's phone, and when the crash occurred on Highway 9. The timeline shows Melani left the hospital at 2:20 according to her badge swipe, 13 minutes after her shift ended. Traffic cameras picked up her Honda entering Highway 9 at 2:35. The pileup started at 2:41 when the semi's brake system failed. Melani was 6 cars back from the initial jackknife. Luis documents that her speed was consistent with traffic flow, that she attempted to brake and maneuver when the vehicles ahead started colliding. He notes Brant's phone records show multiple calls to her cell that afternoon, but concludes there's no direct legal causation between his harassment and her death. The accident was caused by mechanical failure in the semi-truck, with Melani simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. He types that while Brant's actions created stress and urgency, they did not directly cause the brake failure or the chain reaction crash. Luis pauses before writing the conclusion, thinking about how unsatisfying it is to document tragedy without clear villains to blame. Sometimes bad things just happen, because multiple small failures align in the worst possible way. He completes the report and marks the case closed, filing it with the sober acceptance that comes from years of investigating accidents where physics and timing matter more than intentions. He emails a copy to the DA's office and CPS, knowing they'll use it in their respective cases. Then he closes the file on his computer and moves to the next investigation, carrying the quiet grief of this one with him. Grant recommends I accept the plea deal during a meeting at his office the following Tuesday. He lays out the offer in clear terms, explaining that if I plead guilty to misdemeanor false personation, the DA will drop the obstruction charge and recommend probation plus community service instead of jail time. He walks me through the pros and cons methodically, never pressuring but making clear this is the safer path. Going to trial means risking a harsher sentence if the jury convicts and the body cam footage makes conviction likely, despite the sympathetic circumstances. The plea guarantees no jail time and keeps my record to 1 misdemeanor instead of 2. Grant explains that trials are expensive and unpredictable, that judges and juries don't always respond to good intentions the way we hope. He says I have 3 days to decide before the offer expires. I leave his office feeling the weight of choosing between fighting for vindication and accepting pragmatic consequences. I spend those 3 days agonizing over whether accepting a plea means admitting I was wrong to help Rachel. I talk to my parents who say they support whatever I decide, but gently note that jail time would devastate our family further. I reread the letter I drafted to the court, thinking about accountability and moral clarity. On Thursday morning, I call Grant and tell him I'll take the plea. He says he thinks it's the right decision, that sometimes accepting consequences is part of doing the right thing. We schedule the plea hearing for the following week. I hang up feeling relieved the uncertainty is ending even as I brace for standing in court and formally admitting guilt. The plea means I'm a convicted criminal, but I'll serve my sentence in the community helping other kids instead of sitting in a cell. Grant reminds me that after completing probation successfully, I might be eligible for record sealing. I focus on that small hope while trying to accept that this chapter of my life will be defined by choices I made in a parking lot when a desperate child grabbed my wrist. 2 weeks after I accepted the plea deal, Rachel sat in the living room of her foster home with Vivian beside her on the couch when Ms. Frattini knocked on the door. The foster mom let her in and Rachel's shoulders went tight, her hands gripping the cushion. Ms. Frattini looked different from that terrible day, less professional and more tired, and she sat in the chair across from them slowly. She asked Rachel how she was doing and Rachel gave short answers at first, watching her carefully. Then Ms. Frattini said she was sorry for not protecting Rachel better that day, that she made a mistake opening the door when Brant arrived. Her voice was quiet and genuine. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, and she said it wasn't Ms. Frattini's fault, that everything was just bad all at once. They talked for almost an hour about what happened and how scared Rachel had been, and Ms. Frattini listened without defending herself or making excuses. By the end, Rachel was sitting forward instead of pressed back into the couch, and when Ms. Frattini stood to leave, Rachel actually said, "Thank you for coming." Vivian walked her to the door and they spoke in low voices for a minute, and when she came back, she told Rachel that took a lot of courage. 3 weeks after my arrest, I stood in front of Judge Ashworth in the courtroom wearing the one nice outfit I owned, my hands shaking slightly as I said the words Grant had practiced with me. I pled guilty to false personation. The judge asked if I understood what I was pleading guilty to, and I said yes. He asked if anyone forced me to take this plea, and I said no. Then he asked if I wanted to explain my actions, and I took a breath and told him about Rachel in the parking lot, the bruises on her arm, her terror about being alone when her father arrived. I didn't make excuses or try to justify breaking the law, just explained what I saw and why I made the choice I made. Grant gave a statement about my character and lack of criminal history. The DA said the state believed the plea was appropriate given the circumstances. Then the judge read Rachel's letter out loud, her words about being scared and desperate and how I stayed calm when everything fell apart. Judge Ashworth was quiet for a long moment after, his expression thoughtful. He accepted my plea and scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt this weird mix of relief that the uncertainty was ending and dread about what sentence I'd get. Grant squeezed my shoulder and said I did well. That being honest and taking responsibility mattered. 2 weeks later, I was back in the same courtroom for sentencing and my stomach was in knots the whole morning. Judge Ashworth came in and everyone stood. Then he told me to approach the bench. He talked for several minutes about the law and why it exists, how even good intentions can't override legal requirements because the system has to protect everyone equally. He said he understood I was trying to help a child in danger, but that I crossed a line when I impersonated someone else and lied to authorities. Then he gave me my sentence. 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory ethics classes, but no jail time. I felt my knees go weak with relief and had to lock them to stay standing. He said he was giving me mercy because of my intentions and lack of criminal history, but that I needed to understand the seriousness of what I'd done. I thanked him and meant it, feeling grateful and ashamed at the same time. Grant walked me out afterward and reminded me to follow every probation requirement exactly, no mistakes. That same week, there was a family court hearing about Rachel's custody, and I wasn't allowed to attend, but Grant called me after to tell me what happened. Judge Ashworth heard arguments from Brant's lawyer about visitation rights and from CPS about safety concerns. Beverly presented all the evidence about the restraining order violations and Brant showing up drunk that day. The judge ordered that Brant could have supervised visits with Rachel only after he completed an alcohol assessment and started treatment. He extended the restraining order for another year and added mandatory anger management classes. Grant said Brant looked furious during the whole thing, but his lawyer kept him from saying anything stupid. Rachel apparently relaxed visibly when she heard she wouldn't be forced into unsupervised time with her father. The judge also ordered ongoing therapy and monthly CPS check-ins to make sure Rachel stayed safe. A few days later, Beverly called to walk me through the safety plan CPS put together for Rachel. Weekly therapy sessions with Vivian to process everything that happened. Monthly check-ins with Beverly to assess how Rachel was doing in foster care. Clear rules about when and how Brant could have contact, all supervised at a CPS facility. The foster family got extra training on working with kids who'd experienced trauma. Rachel's school was notified to watch for any concerning changes in behavior or attendance. Beverly went through each piece methodically, and I felt this weight lift knowing Rachel had all these protections in place. The system that had failed her before was finally working the way it should. I thanked Beverly for taking Rachel's case seriously, and she said that's what they're supposed to do, that sometimes it just takes tragedy to make people pay attention. The next day I met with Grant to hand over all the evidence I'd helped gather. Gail's statements about Brant's harassment, the timeline documentation showing when everything happened, my own notes from that afternoon. Grant organized it into folders and said he'd submit everything non-privileged to CPS, so they had complete context. Watching him put it all away felt like letting go of control, trusting that other people would use the information the right way. Grant reminded me that I'd done everything I could legally do at this point. Now I needed to focus on my own case and getting through probation successfully. He said CPS and the courts would handle Rachel's situation from here. I nodded, but it was hard to step back after being so involved. The first supervised visit between Rachel and Brant happened at a CPS facility downtown, with a trained monitor sitting in the room. Grant heard about it from Beverly and passed the details to me. Rachel was anxious the whole hour, sitting stiff in her chair and barely making eye contact with her father. Brant tried to act normal, asking about school and her foster home, but his frustration at being watched showed through. He kept glancing at the monitor like he wanted to say something but couldn't. Rachel gave one-word answers to most of his questions. Yes. Number. Fine. Okay. The monitor took notes the entire time, documenting how uncomfortable Rachel looked and how Brant's tone got sharper as the visit went on. When the hour ended, Rachel left quickly without hugging him, and the monitor added that to her report. Beverly told Grant the visit went about as expected for a first supervised contact, that they'd continue weekly and see if things improved. I started my community service at a youth resource center on the east side that ran after-school programs and crisis support for at-risk kids. My supervisor was a woman named Maria, who'd been doing this work for 15 years. She showed me around the building and explained what they did, how kids could come for help with homework, or just to have a safe place to be. I got assigned to help with the homework room 3 afternoons a week and to assist with crisis calls when they came in. The work felt meaningful right away. I connected with the teenagers easily, especially the quiet ones who reminded me of Rachel. They opened up about problems at home or school, and I listened without judgment, just tried to help them figure out solutions. Maria pulled me aside after my second week and said I had a natural ability to make kids feel safe, that they trusted me quickly. I felt purpose coming back even while serving my sentence. One afternoon, Luis finished his final report on the accident investigation and filed it with the department. Grant got me a copy through his connections. The report stated that Melanie Wells died in a multi-vehicle pileup on Highway 9, caused by a semi-truck jackknifing due to mechanical failure. Speed and traffic conditions were listed as contributing factors, but no criminal charges were warranted against any driver. The semi-company faced civil liability, but that was separate. Luis documented the timeline of events that day, including Brant's phone calls to Melanie, but concluded there was no direct legal causation between the calls and the crash. The accident was ruled a tragic combination of circumstances. Reading it gave me this somber sense of finality, knowing the legal system had said all it would say about how Melanie died. There would be no villain to blame, no criminal case to follow, just a woman who died trying to get home to her daughter. Grant called me into his office the following week to discuss the future. He pulled out his calendar and marked a date 2 years away, explaining that after I completed probation successfully, I could apply to have my misdemeanor record sealed. It wouldn't erase what happened, but it would remove it from most public record searches. He said employers and landlords wouldn't see it in standard background checks. I'd have to stay out of any legal trouble during probation and complete all my requirements on time. He told me to focus on that goal, on getting through the next 2 years without any problems. I left his office feeling this measured hope that the conviction wouldn't define my entire future, that it would just be a difficult chapter I had to work through. The community service was actually helping me process everything, giving me a way to channel what happened into something useful. I still thought about Rachel every day, wondered how she was doing in therapy and foster care, hoped she felt safer now. But I had to trust the system to take care of her while I took care of my own legal obligations, and tried to rebuild my life around this new reality of probation and community service and ethics classes. A week later, an envelope with a law firm's return address showed up in my mail, and my stomach dropped when I opened it. The letter was 3 pages of legal language basically saying Brant's lawyer was considering civil action against me for defamation and interference with his parental rights. I read it twice, feeling panic build in my chest before I called Grant. He came by that evening and sat at my kitchen table reading through it while I paced around the apartment. Grant set the letter down after a few minutes and looked up at me with that calm expression he always had. He explained that the letter had low legal merit as long as I maintained distance from Brant and didn't speak publicly about the case. It was mostly intimidation, he said, a way for Brant to feel like he was fighting back. The threat still made my hands shake when I filed the letter away in the folder with all my other legal documents, but Grant's assessment helped me understand this was just noise. I focused on staying compliant with every single probation term, showing up early to community service and taking detailed notes in my ethics classes. 2 weeks after that, I had a routine probation check-in hearing at the courthouse and ran into Ms. Graffatini in the hallway afterward. She was carrying her usual thick files and looked tired like always. We made eye contact and she hesitated for a second before walking over to me. She said quietly that her words that day about arresting me were technically incorrect since she wasn't law enforcement. It was a small admission, but it mattered. Her way of acknowledging she made mistakes too in all that chaos. We stood there for a minute in that busy courthouse hallway, and I saw something in her face that looked like regret mixed with understanding. We exchanged this restrained but genuine respect. 2 people who tried to do the right thing and got caught in an impossible situation. She nodded once and walked away toward the CPS offices, and I felt this weird sense of closure about that piece of everything. The next afternoon, Vivian called and said she had something for me from Rachel. I drove to her office and she handed me a folded piece of notebook paper with my name written on the outside in careful teenage handwriting. Inside was a short note thanking me for helping her that day. The words simple but so heartfelt they made my throat tight. Rachel wrote that she knew I got in trouble because of her and she was sorry, but also grateful because she felt safe with me when everything was scary. She drew a small flower in the corner, just a simple daisy with a yellow center, and signed her name at the bottom. I read it 5 times sitting in Vivian's office and cried, not caring that Vivian could see. I carefully folded it back up and put it in my wallet, this physical reminder of why I made the choices I did even when they cost me so much. Vivian said Rachel was doing better in therapy and her foster family was good to her, and I felt this intense relief knowing the system was finally taking care of her properly. A week later, Grant called with news that surprised me. Judge Ashworth had approved limited correspondence between Rachel and me, acknowledging that our connection was formed in crisis, but had value for Rachel's healing process. Vivian would review and deliver any letters or cards, maintaining appropriate boundaries while allowing Rachel to express gratitude and stay connected. It was more than I hoped for, and I promised Grant I would follow every single rule exactly, knowing this privilege could be taken away if I messed up even slightly. I sat down that night and wrote Rachel a careful letter about how proud I was of her for being brave and going to therapy, keeping it appropriate and focused on her well-being. I told her about the youth center where I was doing community service, and how working with other kids who needed help made me feel like something good was coming from what happened. I sealed it and gave it to Vivian the next day, trusting her to decide if it was okay to deliver. 3 weeks after that, Vivian arranged one supervised visit at the youth center during my community service hours. She brought Rachel on a Saturday afternoon when the center was full of teenagers doing homework and playing basketball in the gym. Rachel looked taller somehow, or maybe just healthier, and she smiled when she saw me. We walked through the facility together with Vivian following a few steps behind, and I introduced Rachel to some of the kids I worked with regularly. She was quiet but interested, watching how I helped a 15-year-old girl with her math homework and refereed a dispute between two boys over whose turn it was on the computer. We talked carefully about how she was doing in therapy and whether she liked her foster family and how school was going. Rachel said therapy was hard but helpful, and her foster parents were nice even though it felt weird living with strangers. When it was time to leave, she hugged me quickly before Vivian gently reminded her about maintaining appropriate boundaries. I watched them walk to Vivian's car, feeling this complicated mix of happiness that Rachel seemed okay and sadness that I couldn't do more to help her. Around the same time, Brant started his court-mandated alcohol treatment program after trying to delay it for weeks. His lawyer had filed multiple motions asking for extensions, but Judge Ashworth finally put his foot down and said Brant either started treatment or lost his supervised visitation rights entirely. So Brant showed up to the outpatient program twice a week, sitting in group sessions and complaining constantly to his lawyer about how unfair everything was. The counselor who ran his group noted in session reports that Brant was technically compliant, showing up on time and participating when required, but his attitude was resistant, and he showed no genuine insight into his drinking problem. He blamed Milani for everything, blamed me for interfering, blamed CPS for overreacting. But he kept showing up because losing access to Rachel completely wasn't something he could accept, even if it meant sitting through sessions he thought were pointless. I started volunteering as a court watcher around this time, sitting in the public gallery during family court proceedings and taking notes for a legal advocacy nonprofit. The organization trained volunteers to observe hearings and document what happened, looking for patterns in how judges ruled and whether families were treated fairly. It let me channel my impulse to help into something structured and appropriate, witnessing the system work while staying within proper boundaries. I sat through custody hearings and dependency cases, watching other families go through their own terrible situations, and I took careful notes about what each judge said and how long hearings lasted, and whether parents had lawyers. My supervisor at the nonprofit said I had valuable insight into how frightening the system could be for people in crisis, that my perspective as someone who had been through it made my observations more useful. The work felt meaningful in a way my regular job didn't, like I was contributing to something that might actually help other people avoid the mistakes I made. 3 months after that terrible day in Rachel's living room, I sat in my apartment on a Saturday morning drinking coffee and thinking about everything that happened. Melanie was gone, and that loss could never be fixed. A woman I never met but whose absence I felt every time I thought about Rachel growing up without her mother. Rachel was safe now but grieving and healing slowly, working through trauma with Vivian's help and learning to trust her foster family. The systems that failed her that day were making small improvements, CPS changing their protocols about home visits, and Judge Ashworth being more careful about supervised visitation requirements. I was learning to live with consequences while maintaining my belief that protecting a scared child was worth the cost, even if it meant a criminal record and 2 years of probation and hundreds of hours of community service. Nothing was perfect or completely resolved, and I knew it never would be. But Rachel had therapy and supervision and safety plans in place, people watching out for her and making sure she stayed protected. I had meaningful work helping other vulnerable kids through the youth center and the court watching program, channeling what happened into something useful. We were both moving forward one careful day at a time with realistic hope that things could gradually get better, not in some dramatic way, but in the slow, steady progress of healing and rebuilding and learning to trust that the system could work when people fought to make it work. Man, that was heavy from start to finish. From parking lot to probation to both of them finding some kind of peace. Anyway, if you made it through this whole legal saga with me, thanks for sticking around. Hit that like button, maybe subscribe if you want more of these intense stories. I'll see you next time. Peace.